Are you sick and tired of serotonin boosters getting you down? Test stress turning you into a mess? Is life feeling hopeless for you?
Oh fuck!
Hey you!
Me?
Yeah, are you depressed?
Yes!
Well, why don't you turn that frown upside down? Hi, my name's Rohan Singh, and us here at No Data with Data have been researching why you might not be feeling your best. Are you shopping at 5 or 6 stores for those big brand names trying to flex on all your haters? Well, don't shop anymore. At our place, our data shows that it's the pressures in your life that are causing you your sadness. But with this revolutionary new data, you can turn your frown upside down.
Us here at No Data with Data, we chose the most reliable sampling techniques possible to get this data to you, the consumer. We use multi-state sampling here because we thought it'd give the best representation of the Lucas population, our sample. We split the population into grade, and then within the grade, classes, and within each class, gender. We chose classes because we just thought it'd be a very easy way to organize students, and also we randomly selected to ensure that there was no bias in our process.
Look at this graph. We asked different genders and different grades at our school to rank the importance of things like happiness, the importance of their appearance, the pressures they face from influences in their life and their parents, as well as the amount of high-end clothing they own.
It's me.
I don't really care.
These are the histograms of all the marks desired by Lucas students. As you can see, they all tend towards left-skewed data. And by the way, we chose a histogram because marks tend to fall into ranges, and we chose ranges of 10. So, as you can see, despite gender or grade, Lucas students generally desired the same range of marks.
We took averages of all of this data and made scatter plots out of them. This graph here shows high school students' averages contrasted with their level of happiness. As you can see, it has a very weak correlation coefficient of only 0, which means this is really unreliable data. So if we extrapolated this, it shows that if you had an average of 100%, then your happiness level would be a 3.3. But if your average was a 0%, then your happiness level would be a 3.295. Your happiness level at a 0% is shown by the y-intercept of this graph. This next graph shows the number of high-end clothing zone versus your level of happiness. As you can see, it's not extremely strong data with only a correlation coefficient of 0.25. The y-intercept of this graph is also only 3.08, which means that with 0 high-end clothing items owned, your happiness level will be around a 3. If we extrapolate this data, we realize that with 5 items of high-end clothing, you'll have a happiness of 3.962. This graph here shows people ranking the pressure they feel from influences in their life versus their level of happiness. As you can see, it has a negative slope, so this indicates that as the pressure from their influences increases, their level of happiness decreases. So it has a y-intercept of 4.2. Which means that if their level of pressure was 0, then their happiness would be pretty high. And it has a correlation coefficient of negative 0.3. So while the data may not be the most reliable, we can still see a general trend. If someone ranked their level of pressure as a 5, we can extrapolate this data to show that their happiness would be a level of 2.4. As you can see, that's a pretty big difference depending on the pressures that they feel in their life. Similar to the last graph, this one shows the level of pressure students feel from their parents contrasted against their level of happiness. As you can see, this has a negative correlation, and with a y-intercept of 0, the level of happiness exceeds our rating scale, giving it a rating of 5.025. If we extrapolate this data and say that the students felt an average level of pressure of 5, then this means their rating of happiness would be 2.24, which is pretty drastic difference. It also has a correlation coefficient of 0.426, meaning that the data doesn't really all cluster around the line of best fit very well, but we're still going to use it to make our discoveries.
It was initially thought that all graphs would have good causality, considering that more grades generally should mean less happiness as there's more pressure put on people, and overall pressures should mean low happiness because pressures can cause depression, and furthermore, more clothing should mean more material self-worth and overall more happiness in general. While pressures, as hypothesized, have shown to have the strongest and negative correlation, it is surprising that the marks to happiness relation show no correlation whatsoever and thus no causality. These are our results for how people agreed with certain questions in our research. So we noticed that in areas such as how high-end clothing plays a factor in their happiness and also how social life plays a factor, there wasn't lots of difference. They were really similar in frequency and in shapes of the graphs. However, in the middle two, that's when the genders started deviating. There was lots of consistency in the genders. However, between boys and girls, there was lots of differences. For example, for self-consciousness, girls often would have a higher frequency of yes, while boys often said no, they were not self-conscious. Whereas if they were influenced by others, girls would often say yes, while boys would say no. This is our data collected on the narcotic use by Lucas students. As you can see, there tends to be a general increase in recurrence and frequency as you go up in grade. However, if you compare each gender independently per grade, there really isn't much of a difference, which shows that narcotic use really depends on how old you are. It's interesting to see that when comparing the happiness levels between males and their narcotics use, there seems to be a correlation between an increase in happiness in later grades and an increase in narcotic use. However, in females, this is not the case, because as narcotics increase, it actually tends to be the trend that the female happiness decreases. Our company will be studying this more in the future. He's on drugs. We took some of our most important ranking data and converted them into box whisker charts to show even more trends that we might have missed. As you can see from our graphs, there wasn't a lot of trends being shown. Generally, the first two box whisker plots where happiness and importance of appearance were measured, the data did tend towards the median more, as you can see by the smaller boxes. However, the ranges and the medians really fluctuated too much to show any real trend. Furthermore, the pressures faced by parents was interesting to see because the boxes were very long, which meant a very large spread around the median, showing that there wasn't a lot of cluster around those median values. So, really nothing was revealed there.
When we calculated the standard deviation for the ranking questions based off of grade and gender, we noticed that they all clustered around a value of around 1.15. Now this may seem like a small value, but out of a rating scale out of 5, it showed that our data was decently spread out around our average. So for the grade 9 males, we had a standard deviation of around 1.25. For the grade 10 males, 1.24, for the grade 11 males, 1.18, and for the grade 12 males, 1.19. Now for the grade 9 females, it was a value of 1.08, for grade 10 females, 1.25, for grade 11 females, 1.12, and for grade 12 females, 0.96. Now with these values, we can conclude that our data usually spread around a unit of 1 around our average. As in any survey, there were a few sources of error that we tried to keep at a minimum. So one source of error was a response error in the surveys themselves. Sometimes as we were surveying high school students, we were unsure of whether someone was answering as a joke or whether they were being serious. But as there was no way to tell, we decided to enter all data points given. Unfortunately, there was a source of bias which we recognized after the surveys were handed out. In one of our questions, we asked respondents how many items of high-end clothing they owned, and we gave them examples to set the bar as what classified as high-end clothing. Unfortunately, however, the examples given focused on male-only brands. There was one example that's predominantly owned by females, which was Canada Goose. However, we feel that we could have improved upon this by giving an equal number of female brands and male brands. Another source of error within our surveys is that at the end we averaged all of our data points, and we used a weighted average and then graphed these on scatter plots. Because of this, we were unable to track the impact of singular data points, so we were unable to show on a single person whether their number of clothing owned, for example, directly impacted their level of happiness, and instead we had to use weighted averages to represent this data.
Furthermore, as evidenced by the rather large standard deviation relative to the size of the rankings, the overall accuracy of using weighted means to make scatter plots generally means that the graphs made do not fully represent the sample chosen. Furthermore, when collecting samples, it turned out that in later grades, such as the grade 12 females, there wasn't a lot of data there because we did not account for inequality in each class. So ultimately, the data for the grade 12s is not fully accurate and representative.
I can't pretend.